So today we are going to be talking about intercepts and horizontal and vertical lines. So this will be a different way on how to graph linear lines on a coordinate plane instead of using our normal slope-intercept form of the y equals mx plus b. So you guys are going to learn a different form and then how we can use the x-intercept and the y-intercept to form our line as well. So our new standard form equation that you guys will see is this capital A x plus capital B y equals c. So this is the standard form equation, and x and y, those are our normal independent and dependent variables. So x is our independent variable. Y is our dependent variable, so those are the same as our y equals mx plus b up here. And then our capital A and capital B just represent our coefficients. So remember, coefficients are numbers attached to variables, and capital C, since it's over here by itself, is our constant. So A, B, and C will just be numbers, okay? All right, so as we have talked about before, we talked about the y-intercept and our y equals mx plus b, because remember, b represented our y-intercept. And that definition was the x-coordinate of a point where a line intersects the y-axis, which once again we have already talked about the y-intercept in our y equals mx plus b form, because whatever our plus b was or minus b was, that's where it crossed out on the y-axis. So if that's the y-intercept, I'm sure you guys could probably guess what the x-intercept would be, and that's something new that we're talking about here, and it will help us create our new lines in the standard form. So our x-intercept is the x-coordinate this one down here should be y. So it would be the x-coordinate of a point where a line intersects the x-axis. So it's the point where the line crosses the x-axis at, just like for the y-intercept, it's the point where the line crosses the y-axis at. So as you guys know, you can pause the video and write all this down, but I'm just going to go ahead and move on. All right, so there is a way to find your intercepts when given your standard form of the equation ax plus by equals c. So if you guys want to find out what your x-intercept is, so where it's going to cross out on the x-axis, all that we have to do is substitute 0 in for y, and then solve this like a basic equation for x. Because if we plug in 0 for y, that means that we are going to end up with x equals whatever, and that will be our x-intercept. So let's see what happens. So if I want to find out my x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y, since I want to solve for x. So that should be the only variable that I have in my equation. And when you plug in 0 for y, notice how 3 times 0 is just 0. So this is going to cancel out, and I'm just going to be left with a one-step equation. So my step on both sides to get x by itself is to divide by 2 on both sides, and I get an x-intercept of 3. So my line in this 2x plus 3y equals 6 is going to cross at 3 on the x-axis. And then same thing, if I want to figure out what my y-intercept is, I can do the opposite. So I need to get y by itself, which means I should plug in 0 for x and then solve it like a basic equation. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x here. And then once again, 0 times anything is just 0, so this will cancel out, and I'll be left with 3y equals 6. And then our last step to get y by itself is to divide by that 3 on both sides, and we should get y equals 2. So, based on this equation, I could find the x-intercept, and I can find my y-intercept, and then I can plot these 2 points on a graph. So I can put a point at x equals 3 and put a point at y equals 2, draw a line through the 2 points, and then that will be our line of the graph. So you guys try these 2 down here, so go ahead and pause the video, and then after you finish it, you can play the video to see the answer that I got. So again, you're trying to find the intercept, so if you're trying to solve for x, you need to plug in 0 for y, and if you're trying to solve for y, then you need to plug in 0 for x. So let's find x first. So if I want to figure out x, I need to plug in 0 for y, so let's see what happens. Alright, so this is negative 5 times 0, but remember anything times 0 will just cancel out. So now I'll be left with 2x equals negative 10. And then last step to get x by itself is to divide by 2 on both sides. And my x-intercept would equal negative 5. Alright, and then to find my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x, so let's see what happens. So 0 times 2 is 0, so these will cancel out. Notice how I have negative 5y left, so I'm going to bring that down. And then my last step to get y by itself is to divide by negative 5 on both sides, and negative 10 divided by negative 5 is a positive 2. So, in this equation, 2x minus 5y equals negative 10. It's going to cross at negative 5 on the x-axis, and it's going to cross at 2 on the y-axis. And if I were to plot those, I can just draw a line through those 2 points, and then that will be our line. And something that I do want to touch base on too, so you guys are used to the y equals mx plus b form. So yes, we could move our 2x and then divide by negative 5 on both sides to get it in that y equals mx plus b form, but when we are using our standard form, notice that we don't have to move anything around. All that we're doing is we're substituting 0 in for x or y and then just solving a one-step equation. So this way could be easier for some of us because some of us can make mistakes by trying to move stuff to the other side and then not dividing correctly. So this is just another way that you guys could graph a line. Alright, so let's see what you guys got for B here. So again, let's say I want to solve for my x-intercept first, which means I need to plug in 0 for y. So 0 times 3 is just 0, so those will cancel out. I now have negative 6x equals 18. And then my last step to get x by itself here is to divide by negative 6 on both sides. And 18 divided by negative 6 gives me my x-intercept of negative 3. Alright, and then now I'm going to do the same thing to solve for my y-intercept, which means I need to plug in 0 for x. And let's see what we get here. So negative 6 times 0 is 0, so those will cancel out. I'm now left with 3y equals 18. And then to get y by itself, divide by 3 on both sides. And then 18 divided by 3 gives me a positive 6. So if I wanted to graph this equation, I would put a point at negative 3 on the x-axis. I would put a point at 6 on the y-axis, and then draw my line through those 2 points. So if you guys got that, awesome job. We are going to go ahead and move on to some graphing problems. All right, so at the top here, they want us to graph using the intercepts. So if they tell you that x equals 4, then all we have to do is put a point at -4 on our x-axis. And then if our y equals 7, that means that our line is going to cross at 7 on our y-axis. And then all that we have to do, if they want us to draw a line through those 2 points, just take your ruler and draw your line. And then that's what our graph is going to look like. All right, and then same thing with order pairs. So 5, 0, this is representing our x-axis, and 0, 2 is representing our y-axis. So I do need to plot 5, 0, so that's my x-axis right there. And then plot 0, 2, and that's our y-axis. And then draw a line through those points. And there's our graph. So let's take everything that we've done so far and put it into one problem now. So we are given our equations, so we first need to find our intercepts, and then we're going to graph it. So once again, if I want to solve for x, I need to plug in or substitute in 0 for y. So 4 times 0 is just 0, so those will cancel. We're left with 2x equals 8. And then to get x by itself, we just need to divide by 2 on both sides, and we get an x-intercept at 4. And then same thing, we need to solve for y now, which means we need to substitute in 0 for x. So when I substitute in 0, those cancel. I'm left with 4y equals 8. Divide both sides by 4, and 8 divided by 4 gives us positive 2. Alright, so after you guys find out what your x and your y intercept are, now you can just graph them. So I have an x-intercept of 4, which means my line is going to pass through 4 on the x-axis. And I have a y-intercept of 2, which means that my line is going to pass through 2 on the y-axis. And then just draw my line. And there we have it. Alright, so you guys go ahead and try B. So pause the video and try B, and then play it for your answer. So if I want to solve for x, you guys should have substituted in 0 for y. So these will cancel. I'm left with 4x equals 20. Divide both sides by 4, and you should have gotten x equals 5 for your x-intercept. And then you will do the same thing, but substituting in 0 for x now. So those will cancel. You're left with negative 5y equals 20. Divide both sides by negative 5, and you get a y-intercept of negative 4. Alright, so if you guys want to plot those on the graph, you have an x-intercept of 5 and a y-intercept of negative 4. Draw your line through those 2 points, and there's our graph. So good job if you guys got that. So there is some situations here that you guys do need to know about. So if y equals b, where b is any real number, graph is going to be a horizontal line through 0b. So if I were to graph this, so let's say I had y equals 3. So here's my quadrant 1, and if y equals 3, that means that I'm going to have a point right here at 3, and it's going to be a horizontal line, which means what kind of slope is a horizontal line? Well, slope is going to be equal to 0. Remember, if it's horizontal line, it's a slope of 0. And then, vice versa, if you have x equals any real number, then our graph is a vertical line. So if I were to graph this, let's say we had x equals 3. That means at 3 on my x-axis, I'm going to have a point, and then it's going to be a vertical line going straight up and down. So what kind of slope is a vertical line? Well, it's an undefined slope. So there may be situations like this where you don't get an x-intercept or you don't get a y-intercept, so it's just going to be a zero slope if it's a horizontal line, or a vertical line, which is an undefined slope. Alrighty, moving on to some application problems, or actually let's do this side first. So based on what we just talked about, we are going to graph the given equation. So if we just have x equals -1, that just means that our line crosses at -1 on our x-axis, and it's just going to be a vertical line going straight up and down, which means that this is an undefined slope. All right, and then if y equals 0, we are going to have a point at 0. And then this is just going to be a zero slope on the x-axis. X equals 4, that means that we have a point at 4 on our x-axis, and this will become a vertical line going straight up and down. And then y equals 3, we'll have a point at 3 on our y-axis, and this will be a zero slope. So just remember, because we just talked about finding the intercept, so if it's only y equals 3, that just means that our line passes through 3, and it's not going to pass through any x value, so that's why it's going to be a horizontal line so that it doesn't touch any of the x values. And then if it's x equals 4, that means that our line crosses through 4 on the x-axis, which means it's not going to touch any of our y values, so that's why it's a vertical line. Alright, so they want us to look at these lines down here and then write the equation for each line. So line A is a vertical line going straight up and down, so notice how it does not touch any of our y values, which means that this is going to be an x equals problem since it only crosses through an x number on the x-axis. And then you just have to put, where does it cross at on the x-axis? Well, it crosses at -2, so line A will have the equation of x equals -2. Line B is a horizontal line, so notice how it doesn't touch any of our x numbers, which means that it's going to be a y-intercept, so our equation is going to be y equals, and then you just need to tell where it crosses at on the y-axis. So if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it crosses at 9, so our equation is y equals 9. So you guys try C and D, and then pause the video real fast and then play it when you guys are ready. So line C was a horizontal line, and it crossed at -3 on your y-axis, so your equation should have been y equals -3. And then line D crossed at the x-axis, so that means that it's going to be x equals wherever it crosses at, and that was at 5. Alright guys, moving on to our last problem, and we are using a representation here, so with an application. So the middle school wants to make $4,740 for yearbooks. Print yearbooks X costs $60 and digital yearbooks Y costs $15. This can be represented by the equation 60x plus 15y equals 4,740. Use the intercepts to graph the equation. Remember to label your x and y axes and interpret the x and the y intercept. Alright, so let's first label our graph here so that we don't forget to do that. So they tell us that print yearbooks is going to represent our x-axis and digital yearbooks is going to represent our y-axis. So let's go ahead and do that. So print yearbooks is our x-axis, and digital yearbooks is our y-axis. So our equation that they gave us, which I am going to do this over here, is the 60x plus 15y equals 4740. So they want us to find our x and y intercepts and then graph that on our graph here. So let's solve for x first. So I'm going to plug in 0 for y. And then 0 times anything, 0. So now we have 60x equals 4740. And then to get x by itself, we can divide both sides by 60, and we get an x-intercept of 79. All right, and then we'll do the same thing to solve for y. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So 60 times 0 is 0, so I now have 15y equals 4740. And to get y by itself, I can divide both sides by 15. And 4740 divided by 15 gives us 316. All right, so based on the numbers that we got, I'm going to label my x-axis by tens, since we have to go all the way to 79 here. And I'll stop at 100. And then our y-axis, since I have to go all the way up to 316, I'll probably go up by 25s. All right, and then now we can plot these. So at x equals 79, that's where the line is going to cross at. And then at y equals 316, that's where the line is going to cross at on the y-axis. Alright, so let's make sure that we have done everything so far. So use the intercepts to graph the equation. So that's what we did. We used our intercepts to graph the equation. Remember to label the x and the y axes. So we did label those because they told us print yearbooks were x and digital yearbooks y cost the 15. So the last thing that we need to do is interpret the x and the y intercepts. So looking at our x-intercept, we got an answer of 79. So if we had 79 print yearbooks, this means that we will have no digital yearbooks. So the most, based on the middle school wants to make the 4,740 yearbooks, if they don't want to print any digital yearbooks, they would still have to print at least 79 print yearbooks to be able to get their goal that they want. So if I wanted to interpret that, I could just put can print 79 print yearbooks and no digital yearbooks. to reach their goal. So they need to print at least, so I can put at least there, so can print 79 print yearbooks and no digital yearbooks to reach their goal. And then same thing for the y-intercept. This means that they could print 316 digital yearbooks and no print version yearbooks to still reach their goal as well. I guess if it's digital, you're not going to be able to print it. So they can have 316 digital yearbooks and no print yearbooks to reach their goal. Alright, so just to wrap up, so you guys learned a different way to graph equations from our slope-intercept form of the y equals mx plus b is by using your intercept. So if you're trying to solve for your intercepts, you would plug in 0 for y if you're trying to find your x-intercept, and then you would plug in 0 for x if you're trying to find your y-intercept, and then you can just graph your intercepts and then draw the line through those 2 points there. Okay? So if you guys have any more questions, please email your teacher, but the homework is for my class, it's on Canvas, but it could be different for your class. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day.